What's up? Hello, and welcome to today's 360 Life video. In today's video, we are building yet another budget-minded VR PC, this time pairing an AMD Ryzen 5 2600 with a 6GB Nvidia GTX 1060. So stay tuned. Welcome back. And boy, do we have some interesting results from FutureMark's virtual reality benchmarking software, VRMark, to share with you today. But first, let's get this build started. So for this PC build, a Fractal Designs Meshify C was plucked off the shelf. And while you can find a more inexpensive case, I really wanted to build in something with a tempered glass side panel and something that came with a couple of fans pre-installed. Personally, I like the Fractals cases, but if you need to tighten up your belt and your budget, you can definitely save a few bucks going with a cheaper case. But at less than 90 bucks with a glass side and two fans, the Meshify C TG is not a bad deal either. I already gave away what CPU we are going with, and that is a Ryzen 5 2600 6-core 12-threaded CPU with a base clock of 3.4 GHz with a max boost of 3.9 GHz. It comes with AMD's Wraith Stealth Cooler and is going to work just fine for this non-overclocked 65-watt TDP CPU. An Asus ROG B350F will be handling the motherboarding duties. The Strix B350F supports our 3200 MHz RAM and has onboard Intel LAN, pretty nice audio chipset, and a decent looking software suite for tuning both the cooling and performance, along with some pretty cool audio features, especially for you streamers out there. This is also a pretty nice looking motherboard. It's blacked out with just a touch of RGB, which is a bonus since this is going in a glass-sided case. We have a bronze-rated Corsair CX650M modular power supply providing the juice for this machine. It's going to be equipped with a G.Skill Flare X 16GB 3200 MHz kit that we already had in the studio. And looking at current prices, this kit has gone down a bit in price from when we first picked it up. It is nice to see prices coming down on something for a change. For this video, we are using our 256GB M.2 SSD as our system drive. And as a bonus, it already comes preloaded with the OS, our VR benchmarks, and utilities. And last, and perhaps most importantly, our GPU. We found a single fan, compact EVGA 6GB GTX 1060 that lots of people wanted to see get benchmarked. So here it is. It has a core clock of 1607 MHz with a boost clock of 1835 MHz. It has 1280 CUDA cores, which gives it some use outside of VR for use in Photoshop or maybe even some light video editing. Now, one small thing to note here is I picked this single fan compact model up only because I plan on repurposing this card down the road into a very small form factor build. If it wasn't for that variable, I'd probably go with a 2-fan version, even if I had to pay a few bucks more. To this G, more fans equals more cooling, and more cooling means more overclocking headroom. Or just a happier, cooler GPU over the course of its lifetime. Now this PC went together well, booted with zero issues. Once it was up and running, we installed the latest drivers for the motherboard and GPU, and it was ready for benchmarking. And for those benchmarks, we will once again primarily be using FutureMark's VRMark, although we will be capturing Cinebench scores as well. We run each benchmark 3 times and then average the scores for the totals. VRMark has 3 benchmarks: the orange room, the cyan room, and the blue room. And if you are not too familiar with VRMark, here's what each one of those benchmarks tests specifically. The orange room tests and reports based on the minimum performance specs for both the Vive and the Rift. The minimum requirements, if you will. The cyan room measures for DirectX 12 compatibility and performance. And last is the Blue Room, which is the most demanding, utilizing much higher resolutions and more demanding volumetric lighting effects to help determine just how future-proof the system is. So, let's get started. In the Orange Room's benchmark, we get an average score of 6,952, 32% higher than VRmark's recommended minimum for a VR-ready PC, and about the same percentage below the high-end score, right in the middle. In the Cyan Room, with a score of 3,707, it falls closer to the minimum side, scoring 18% over the minimum, but falling 55% below what VRmark considers to be high-end. The DirectX 12 performance really suffers here. Now, on to the last test in the Blue Room. Here, the system scores 1,208, which is 11% higher than the minimum and 40% below the high-end ranking. That's about what I would expect to see, and although looking bad on paper, falls in line with other systems we have tested. Interestingly, in the overall test results, our system earns a score of 11,867. We see this combination fall behind the AMD RX 480 equipped R3 and FX 8320 overclock systems we recently tested. How? Well, the 1060 scores better in both the Orange and Blue Rooms, just like we would expect. But in the Cyan Room, which if you remember is DirectX 12 specific, the 1060 scores so poorly against the RX 480, it drags the overall score below the RX 480 equipped system scores. I've seen similar tests, and traditionally you'd expect to see a 10% or so difference in DirectX 12 performance, putting a 1060 versus an RX 480, but here we see a difference of 16%. So, while that anomaly isn't enough for me to tell you to get an AMD RX 480 or 580 over a GTX 1060, for those of you who already may have one, there is certainly no reason to look to a GTX 1060 as any kind of an upgrade. One other interesting phenom here was, no matter how I overclocked the CPU and RAM, it made no discernible impact on the VRmark test scores. Of course, we saw increases in our Cinebench numbers, but I think it's safe to say the Ryzen 5 2600 is more than enough CPU for a GTX 1060 for virtual reality applications. So overall, this system certainly meets and beats the minimum VR requirements. This would make a great entry-level VR machine, and with the 6 cores and 12-thread CPU mixed with the GTX 1060's 1280 CUDA cores and 6 GB of video RAM, it would also make for a decent productivity workstation, not a powerhouse, but it would work well, and would be a new CPU away from getting quite the facelift. Think Ryzen 7 2700 with 8 cores and 16 threads. So, this may not be the best bang for your buck VR-centric gaming machine, but I think the average computer enthusiast would be well served with this PC for gaming, development, graphical arts, and even some video editing if you equip this with the right drives. So, with some careful shopping, deal hunting, and patience, I'm sure you can build this system for about 900 bucks. I did. Well, I think that's going to be the end for now. I hope you liked today's video, and I think I need to do some more testing with the system and with a few more video cards and really test the Ryzen 5's upper limits. So, drop us a like and subscribe if you want to see more VR news, reviews, and of course, games. But don't forget to enjoy that 360 life.